If you're a single parent of a teen boy who is slipping away mentally and emotionally, with screens swallowing him and social media making it worse, here's why it feels like you're talking to a wall at home, while the exact same words suddenly land when they come from someone else. In this video, I'll be talking about what's actually happening underneath that dynamic. Because this isn't just about screens or attitude, and it's definitely not just about him not listening. What you're running into is something much deeper. You're running into a shift where who says something becomes more important than what's being said. And once you see that clearly, everything starts to make a lot more sense. Let's break it down. First, you have to understand this. During adolescence, your son's brain is not neutral about you anymore. It used to be. When he was younger, you could say something and it would land more or less directly. Now it doesn't. Now every single thing you say gets filtered. Filtered through questions he's not even consciously aware of asking. Is this control? Is this limiting me? Have I heard this 100 times already? And by the time your words reach him, they're not arriving as neutral advice anymore. They're arriving as pressure. That alone changes everything. Because even if what you're saying is completely reasonable, even if it's exactly what he needs to hear, it doesn't get processed cleanly. It gets distorted. Now layer on top of that something most parents completely miss. You're not just a messenger in his life, you're history. You're the person who set rules for years. You enforced consequences. You decided what was allowed and what wasn't. You saw him at his weakest. You corrected him. You shaped him. And because of that, every sentence you say carries that entire history with it. So when you say something like, take school seriously, what he hears isn't just advice. What he hears is, you don't trust me to figure this out. Or, you still see me as a child. Or even, here we go again. Same words, completely different meaning, right? If you want to learn more about the most effective steps to bypass psychological reactance, I've got a school community where I show folks the 4-step Bypass Reactance Communication Model in action. I put the link in the description for you. Now compare that to someone outside the family, a coach, a teacher, an older guy he looks up to. That person doesn't carry your history. They don't have control over his life. They can't punish him. They can't take things away. And because of that, their words land differently. They land as input, not pressure. And this is where something really important comes in. Teenage brains, more than most of us realize, are incredibly sensitive to status. They're constantly scanning who has authority, who has freedom, who seems like they've earned their position. And here's a key distinction. Parental authority is given, external authority feels earned. That difference matters more than it should, but it matters. So when someone outside the home says, you need discipline, your son doesn't hear control, he hears credibility. There's a mental shortcut, as it were, that kicks in. If they're saying it, maybe it's real, even if it's the exact same sentence you've been repeating for years. Now, underneath all of this, there's one core mechanism driving the whole thing, called psychological reactance. Now, psychological reactance explains almost everything you're seeing here. Here's what it means in simple terms. When people feel like their freedom is being restricted, they push back. Even if the advice is good, even if it would help them. And parents trigger this response by default. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because of who you are and what you represent. You represent rules, you represent limits, you represent consequences. So when you say something, even calmly, even logically, it can still feel like restriction. And your son's brain responds with, I need to push back. He's not trying to be difficult. He's trying to stay autonomous. That's the deeper layer here. Because adolescence at its core is about one question. Who am I separate from my parents? And one of the fastest ways to answer that question is to disagree, to challenge, to reject, to look elsewhere. So this resistance you're seeing, it's not just defiance. It's part of the process. If he accepted everything you said without question, he wouldn't develop a sense of self that feels like his. He would just inherit yours. And that doesn't create confidence, it creates dependence. On some level, your teenage son's defiance is an identity building feature, a life building feature. Now here's where this becomes really important for you. Because once you understand all of this, the strategy changes. The goal is no longer, how do I make him listen to me? That's the wrong question. The better question is, how do I make it easier for the message to actually get through? Because right now, the issue isn't the content, it's the channel. Your words are carrying too much emotional charge, too much history, and too much implied control. And that's what's blocking them. So the shift is subtle, but powerful. Instead of increasing pressure, you reduce it. Instead of instructing, you observe. Instead of pushing conclusions, you create space for him to arrive at them. And sometimes, this is the part many parents resist, you let the message come from somewhere else. Not because you're giving up your role, but because you're being strategic about how influence actually works at this stage. A mentor, a coach, these act as alternative channels. Same message, lower resistance, higher impact. Because it bypasses that automatic reactance. Okay, this is starting to make sense, Max Orlevich, but how do I actually square all of this away in my head? Here's the reframe that makes this easier to accept. You're not losing influence, you're redistributing it. You're still shaping the environment, you're still deciding what your son is exposed to, you're still setting the standards. But instead of forcing the message directly, you're designing the conditions where he chooses to accept it. And that's a completely different game. Because in the end, during this phase, your authority doesn't disappear, it evolves. It shifts from direct control to indirect influence, from telling to structuring, from pushing to positioning. The cool thing is that once you understand that shift, you stop taking the resistance personally. You stop trying to win every conversation, and you start playing a smarter game. A game where the goal isn't to be the one who says it, but to make sure it gets heard. And that's pretty nifty.